Well, yet another night of very intense violence. We're getting reports of 10 people killed in the southern town of Khan Yunis, and this just hours before this ceasefire was to come into effect. Heavy artillery shelling as well on the north and in the east of Gaza. So very, very intense firing. And moments ago as well, again, just before this ceasefire came into effect at 8 a.m. Local time, very heavy shooting coming from the Israeli vessels posted off the coast of Gaza. So obviously the violence absolutely not letting up or diminishing in the hours, even in the minutes leading up to this ceasefire.
Now, we've seen 4 of these short-term ceasefires so far. We've seen how they went or how they didn't go. What can we expect from this one?
Well, listen, just from the sheer intensity of the firing coming from both sides, as I mentioned, heavy artillery shelling being conducted by Israeli forces, armored vehicles, planes also, obviously Israel's aviation in full swing, and the vessels, rockets also flying out of Gaza. This seemed like it was very much part of that negotiating process that leads up to a ceasefire. And that I mean that both parties absolutely do not want to project the image of a party which is surrendering or capitulating. So shooting up until the last minute is part of this process where basically both parties are flexing their muscles and showing that they're not laying their arms down because they have to, but rather they're shooting up until the very last minute, and they're showing in doing so that their arsenals are still very much full and are not emptied. And this was something that we had seen back at the end of Operation Pillar of Defense, the last major Israeli operation in Gaza back in November of 2012, right before the ceasefire came into effect. There was very heavy shooting coming from both sides. Whether or not this is going to play out the exact same way remains to be seen. A lot is going to depend on what happens in Cairo. The difference this time is that now we're going into a temporary ceasefire, which is meant for both parties to sit down and discuss what would eventually become a durable, longer-lasting ceasefire. But both parties have warned, as they have during the previous instances of brief ceasefires you mentioned, that if the other side shoots, they will respond.
Now, speaking of flexing their muscles, last night while you were live with my colleague Tom Burgess-Watson, a rocket was set off right next to where you were. Let's take a look at that footage.
Vegetables, fruits are not being cultivated, and so food insecurity is growing in the Palestinian enclave. 80% of Gaza. Hello?
Gallagher,
okay.
Are you all right?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
I'm back
what
in front
happened?
Of the camera.
What happened?
Yeah, I'm fine. This was a rocket. This was a rocket. Rockets were just shot right next to where we're standing. So I'm not going to sit here standing here very long because there usually is a strike
you go, Gallagher.
just moments after this occurs.
All right, we're going to leave you right there. Thank you. Do stay safe. That was the Gallagher Fenwick.
Gallagher, we just saw those images there. Any idea who launched that rocket, who was behind it?
Very difficult to tell, although most rockets are claimed by the different factions. According to local producers in Gaza, this, from the sheer size of the blast, looks like it was, or perhaps there were several rockets, M75 rockets, and these were designed by Hamas in Gaza. These are the long-range rockets that have the ability to go all the way to Tel Aviv, about 70-kilometer range. They were shot just behind me, actually, to my right, in an open field out there. And this, of course, begs several questions. Now, the person who triggered this, did they do it remotely? Were they aware of the presence of the international media? So these are important questions to factor into this event in terms of the decision-making process behind this firing. And then, as I mentioned at the end of that live shot, the Israeli army usually strikes the site of a launch. They didn't last night, although we were given evacuation orders, warned that that some of the buildings around us may be targeted. They didn't. So this was a clear case of rockets being shot from within civilian areas. It has to be said, a lot of Gaza is civilian areas, but let's put things into perspective. With more than 1,400 Palestinians killed in Gaza and some 60 killed on the other side, the story is about them and not about us, the international media. We've been relatively safe up until now.